just being packed in my small little townhome with, you know, a medium-sized TV, and really kind of being on the brink of like, we have like a 1 in 3 chance maybe of making it into this, you know, into the national championship was the ultimate goal. And in some ways the announcers are, you know, come on and they're hyping up, you know, the #1 seed and all this stuff, and then very nonchalantly South Carolina pops up on the board, and I think we all like, and then just erupt. And, you know, I think that's, you know, a testament for that group in particular to where did we come from, how did we get here, and continue to build and build and build and grow. And just that emotion and that explosion at that point was something that was very, very special.
Gamecock Beach Volleyball celebrated its 10th anniversary as a varsity sport at South Carolina this season. We caught up with the two men who have been part of it from the beginning and have seen the program and the sport grow by leaps and bounds. Head coach Moritz Moritz and assistant coach R.J. Abella join us on Gamecock Talk. All right, guys, appreciate you joining us. 10 years of beach volleyball at South Carolina. What comes to mind when you hear that?
Wow, we made it 10 years. And I think the other thing that I think about constantly and that we even spoke about in year 1, year 2 was, what is this going to look like 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now? And then kind of the neat thing, you know, what we continue to try to infuse into the kids was, what's the legacy? What is this going to be 50 years from now? What is this going to be 100 years from now when college athletics looks completely different, but hopefully beach volleyball is continuing on, you know, at 100 miles an hour. So.
Yeah, well, we just had our very first program alumni weekend, which was pretty cool. And 10 years of alumni coming back, and cool to see from the very original squads to recently graduated. We had it tied in with a competition over the weekend, and it was kind of cool talking with opposing teams' parents that maybe we've gotten to know through the recruiting process, and them talking about how awesome it is seeing like all these alumni come back. And for them to say like, wow, this is the first one you guys have done, and the turnout, like, it's definitely caught eyes even outside of the Gamecock family, which is pretty cool.
Well, we want to talk about some of those alumni in a little bit, but let's go back to the beginning, since you two have been here since the beginning with the program. So there's the announcement, we're starting beach volleyball. You guys are on board. What were the biggest challenges in getting this thing off the ground if you look back, you know, in the Wayback Machine there?
I think beach volleyball at that point was still so young on the collegiate level. And there was a lot of people that were transitioning from indoor roles that had an idea of what a program looks like, what it should be run like in terms of compliance and in terms of, you know, structure and format. But I think, and even to this day, we are still fine-tuning all of the little things. I think the beauty of it from my perspective, transitioning from indoor into beach volleyball, the cool thing was this was an opportunity for us to build something from the ground level. It wasn't a rebuild, it was brand new. And to try to progress it into the ability for, you know, for us to be able to do things like some of my, you know, heroes in the coaching world that were able to spend 20, 30, 40 years in their professions at a single institution and build and develop something over time with, you know, unbelievable people throughout the entire process. And, you know, I think the initial challenges are for sure everything that goes into not just running a program, but building a program. We didn't have a facility. We had an idea of what it looked like. We are coming from a scholarship structure that's completely different from what we were familiar with on the indoor side to the beach side, and really just trying to make that transition from one sport to the other. And, you know, learning how to teach volleyball in a kind of a different way as well because of the structure format as well. So
I know you're heavily involved in recruiting. Talk about some of the challenges early on.
I'd say that's definitely the first thing that stuck out in my mind when you asked the question. Reason being, it's, we've spent so much time on the indoor side, and you have a great network with indoor clubs and even other college coaches when it comes to transfers. You step over to the beach world and it's like, don't have a network of beach coaches, and not really, we didn't play professionally or in the Olympics. So we're definitely behind there. And our first year, we only won 4 matches. And then, so it's like, how do you recruit when you aren't winning? You kind of got to recruit to win, you got to win to recruit. But fortunately, that next year we won 14, and then we just kind of kept picking up steam and riding the momentum. And at that time, there wasn't a transfer portal. So this idea of graduate transfers and indoor players stepping over to the beach is something very new. And honestly, it was probably a strength of ours because we had the indoor network of coaches. And so when we first brought in our very first grad transfer, Jade Hayes, I remember getting a lot of flack from a lot of the other college coaches. They're like, she's from Missouri, she doesn't play beach volleyball, like, what are you doing? And a couple years later, all of a sudden, all the other programs are fighting for indoor volleyball graduate transfers, and it's kind of like, well, where's that same energy where we look like idiots and now you guys are wanting to? So the recruiting has definitely evolved over time, but that was definitely one of the biggest hurdles, I would say, from starting the program.
Well, let's talk about that. Well, how has that changed with recruiting now? As you fast forward 10 years, are you recruiting mostly kids who are playing beach somewhere, at the high school level, independently, and do you still look for indoor?
I think I remember one of the very first recruiting trips I took that was beach volleyball specific. And it was a small pocket of athletes in San Diego. And even they weren't completely committed to being beach only athletes at that point. And the tournaments that we recruit at now is that same athlete in a lot of ways, but we're talking about thousands and thousands of athletes that have been now playing beach volleyball specifically for years and years and years. And so there is definitely still a pocket of athletes that we look at that have indoor experience or are playing both. But I think the level of beach volleyball just at the juniors level from 10 years ago to now is so significantly different, so significantly improved. And the depth of talent across the board is incredible. And I think you see that. It kind of resonates in the quality of collegiate teams that there are now and just how it's growing and building.
All right, so you mentioned the first year you win 4 or 5 matches and you win about 10 more matches the next year, and then every year after that you're winning 20 or more matches. What were the keys to elevating the program so quickly to be able to compete on a national level like that?
Well, a lot of that's going to be, like I said, kind of recruiting plays the big. We've always talked about recruiting is like the lifeline of a program. Honestly, it was a lot of just recruiting and building relationships, but more importantly, like kind of developing that first indoor volleyball grad transfer to kind of show the scene like what can be done. And while maybe we were behind with recruiting, but also just our experience being indoor coaches originally, showing what we could do with someone that, hey, this person hadn't played beach volleyball and these coaches weren't Olympians, but look what they were able to do with her. And then so from then forth, honestly, we brought in a lot of graduate transfers from the indoor side, I think really helped propel us when it came to the volleyball on the court. And it was probably a big reason why we also made it to our first and second NCAA tournament appearances.
Well, yeah, you talked about that. You add the sport in 14. It becomes an NCAA championship, I think, in 16 for the first time. Then you guys make it for the first time to the NCAA championships in 17. Mm-hmm. How has the sport grown? Because I know, early on, I think only 8 teams made the postseason, which was really, and it's still really hard to get there. But just in general, how has the sport grown since South Carolina has become a part of it?
Well, when we first started, and I think kind of bouncing back off of what he was saying earlier too, is I think one of the biggest compliments that we got in year one and year two was that where we were heading with our mindset and recruiting and the things that we were doing at that point was where some of those early programs were, 3 and 4 years into their program. So we were doing things and we were picking up on things very quickly and building momentum on that. And I think that's kind of the same transition for what the sport is. I mean, it was the fastest growing NCAA sport, emerging sport. We got to the NCAA, we got to have an NCAA championship as fast as we did. But I think it also, that speaks to how many people are gravitating to it. And the growth and development. I think it, in a lot of ways, from an athletic department standpoint and a university standpoint, it's an ad of a program that really balances everything. It may be not as labor intensive in some ways as like a lacrosse or something along those lines. But then the exposure that you're creating for it, the interest that you're creating from it, I think that we built a lot of momentum early on based off of the Olympics, and at that time it was, still Carey and Misty. And having sustained success at that level is something that continues to trickle down. And I think now having more collegiate programs that are having, more athletes that are going into the pros, and have those aspirations, even though it's, maybe not similar to what a basketball or a football is able to create, we have these avenues more so than we ever have before. And that interest level and that ability to create, for an athlete to come in, play something where you're, tackling the environment the way that they do, but you're on the beach, you're playing beach volleyball. I know for a fact parents typically will enjoy that environment far better than they do when they're sitting in a convention center with 150 courts and whistles going constantly. There's just kind of this more holistic appreciation for the sport, and I think that really is what a lot of people gravitate to and why it's developing so fast.
Well, that's one thing that is neat and unique about beach volleyball. You talked about the environment. There's so much going on at once with whatever 4 or 5 different courts going on, and the fans are literally right on top of you. I mean, they can bring their chairs right up to the edge of the sand, it seems like. And it's probably the only sport I know where music is playing during live play. There's just so much excitement. It kind of feels like a party when you get there, and it's quick. I mean, depending on how many matches you have playing at once, you could be in and out of there, in an hour, depending on how the matches go. What's the best part about the environment you think that makes it so fan friendly?
I think that because of the environment in and of itself, because it is an engaging sport, it's basically action packed from first whistle to the end whistle. And, there's quick transitions in between, but, for us, our environment, I think there's this healthy balance, in my opinion, of where we want this sport to go. We definitely want to maintain a level of professionalism for what we're doing, because we want our athletes to take it serious. We want our coaches to take it serious. We want our spectators to take it serious, because we're competing for a national championship just like anybody else. But at the same time is what else can be a part of that? What's the environment? What's the, what around that can we build and continue to develop an interest in the sport within the community, having kids around, being able to, throw the football in the background, have the music playing. But at the end of the day too, we have people that stick around when it's raining and cold and miserable at the same time. And it's just kind of a part of beach volleyball. And whether you're doing it at a facility like ours or you're doing it on the beach, I think that's just something easy to gravitate towards.
RJ, what's the best part of game day environment for you?
I think for the fans, it's that they essentially get to choose what they want to watch. With like 5 different matches, 6 with the exhibitions, it's like maybe you have one match and it's like the team you're rooting for isn't doing that well. Well, instead of watching it, you can watch a different game. You can watch another one. Or if you're an aspiring collegiate beach volleyball player as like a high school, like maybe you're smaller and it's like, ooh, I want to watch the smaller players that are successful. Maybe on court 1, it's all 6-footers and they just bang. It's not really a defensive show. Well, they have the opportunity to really find out what do they want to see, and they can enjoy specifically what they want, where a lot of other sporting events, you're kind of stuck with one stage, and you're stuck with what you get right there. Beach volleyball, there's just a lot of variety, which I think makes it great.
Talked a little bit earlier about different benchmarks for the program. Your first winning season, first 20-win season, first postseason appearance, and on. First wins over top 10 opponents. What do you guys see as the most significant benchmark that you recall, or a favorite benchmark, in your memories of in building this program that were significant?
I mean, I think you always have a place in your heart for. I mean, I can remember the setting when we're in Hilton Head and we beat Southern Cal. I remember being in Georgia State, and the cool thing about that one even was, we had Shannon Orth on that court, and this year she goes back to that court as in a different role as an assistant coach, and is able to kind of reminisce on when they beat Southern Cal several years ago. I think there's a lot of those one-off games that we can kind of gravitate towards as well, and understand, like, this was a cool moment. I do think probably one of the most significant for me was, the first national championship announcement. Just being packed in my small little townhome with, a medium-sized TV, and really kind of being on the brink of like, we have like a 1 in 3 chance maybe of making it into this into the national championship was the ultimate goal. And in some ways the announcers are, come on and they're hyping up, the number 1 seed and all this stuff. And then very nonchalantly, South Carolina pops up on the board, and I think we all like, and then just erupt. And I think that's, a testament for that group in particular to where did we come from, how did we get here, and continue to build and build and build and grow. And just that emotion and that explosion at that point was something that was very, very special.
How about for you?
I definitely say it was that first tournament appearance. And how I look at it, it's like if you kind of look, the thing with beach volleyball is our tournament at that time was only 8 teams. I would tell a lot of recruits it's the equivalent of indoor volleyball's Final Four, which we usually have our annual coaches convention in conjunction with indoor volleyball Final Four. And those teams that are in the Final Four, like, they are on the big stage. Like, the entire volleyball world, all eyes are on them. With beach volleyball, just making the tournament, it's the exact same experience, where only for us, it was you just make the tournament and you get that attention and all eyes on you. And I guess for me, the 2 reasons why that was the most exciting was, one, if you look at our roster and the other 7 teams that were in the tournament, very heavily California, Florida, Texas. We had our fair share of Texas and California and Florida, but we had girls from Michigan, Ohio, Georgia. We have our first South Carolina girl in the lineup from Hilton Head. So to see them out there with our roster, it's kind of like, I always tell recruits, like, we're like an island of misfit toys where we get overlooked because maybe of where they grew up or how tall they are or what their experience is. And yet they were able to make it to the final stage. And secondly, knowing how awesome these girls are, and maybe they were overlooked, realizing that they're now on a national and international stage where we know how awesome our girls are, but now the whole world gets to see how awesome they are. And that's probably why that first tournament appearance is probably the most memorable for me.
Every sport, let's say at South Carolina, has that turning point recruit that really helps them make a jump. For South Carolina football, you can go back to maybe Stephon Gilmore or Marcus Lattimore. For women's basketball, you can go to Asia Wilson a few years ago. Did you guys have that 1 or 2 that really helped you guys, I don't know, let's say turn some heads or put the program on a higher trajectory?
I'd say that we're kind of, I don't want to say anything because then those who I don't name are going to be, how come you didn't mention? But I would say there were probably 3 that really kind of stick out in my head. And not so much for the contribution on the court, but more for opening the doors.
Okay.
for the future. The first one is actually my very first beach volleyball recruit that I talked to was Julia Manisto. A funny story, I was actually really interested in her partner more than Julia at the time. But recruiting both of them and getting to know Julia and her family, I was like, okay, like here's someone that could probably go under the radar. And lo and behold, we get her. And that first year, the AVCA makes, for the first time, high school beach volleyball All-Americans. And that first year, they only had 6. And no second team, no honorable mentions. Like, these are the 6 top high school beach volleyball kids. And Julia was one of them. So that was really cool. And that just opened a lot of doors where it was like, here's a girl from California coming all the way over to South Carolina for a new program. Like, what is she doing leaving California? And I just remember asking her that. And she mentioned, well, kind of in California, it's all about, everything's so fast paced and everything's about what's new, what's new, what's new. She mentioned when she visited, South Carolina is like old. And I'm like, old? She's like, well, let me clarify. And she said there's a lot of tradition in history at the University of South Carolina. And it was, from the academic standpoint, like you get to see history and tradition. And from athletic standpoint, new facility, new locker room, you also get latest and greatest. So to hear her break down why she chose South Carolina, I was like, that's pretty cool. And we definitely need to use that down the road. And then the other 2 are actually played for the same club. It's Katie Smith and Carly Schneider out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And I think we got in really well with them because their club director started a club when our program started. And so reaching out and developing that relationship, and they were kind of poster children for their club, and for that club director to trust us and really help us out in recruiting them. They're in the record books for program wins and everything, and even from national accolades. So to see both of them come in and play as juniors partners and come to South Carolina, where I think they only played together once. But they definitely helped mold the program and get us to that first NCAA tournament appearance.
This may be the same, maybe a little bit different, but you mentioned you had all the alumni coming back, which is great. When you talk about faces of the program, not just top recruits, but folks who, whatever, for X amount of years did this, did everything right. They don't even have to be the top player, maybe had all the core values you were looking for. What comes to mind in terms of the faces of this program after 10 years?
I think the first one that probably pops into my head, and again, I think when you look at 10 years worth, I mean, we get the benefit of that, right? We're such a new program. We get to actually see the faces of 10 years worth of players that have contributed to this program and built this program. And I think we could go to each one and say, here's a couple things that they really contributed in. One of the ones that really stands out to me is Katie Zimmerman. Just came in from the indoor world, was a grad transfer, relatively new to the beach game in so many different ways, but just embraced everything about team culture, about competitiveness, about building the people around her, to galvanize them in a particular direction. I think it's one thing that coaches and staff, we can always talk about the direction that a program is needing to go and the things that we want to accomplish. But you have to have that kind of internal battery that is energizing it from the inside. And she's one of those players and one of those people that at the heart of it really just pushed everything forward for that group in so many different ways, which, in the context of a beach volleyball program, when you think of football, you think of basketball or even indoor volleyball, you have your 6 people or your 5 people or your team on the court or field at that point, and it's one group pushing forward. Katie was a part of a pair, and she's one of 5 pairs, which is then a part of this greater group on top of it. And so it's like, I got to take care of myself individually first. I got to take care of my pairing secondary or primary, and then how does that function within 5 pairs that are competing at the same time and still picking everybody up. And I think that's one of the many in our program that really was able to push that and build that internally.
Anyone different pop up for you for faces of the program?
I do have a different pick, but I have a cool Katie Riley or Katie Zimmerman story where I actually have known Katie since she was 12 because she played indoor volleyball at Wichita State, which is where I was prior to South Carolina. So in the recruiting process back then, it started when you were like 12 or 13 for some of those top programs. So we had known Katie for a long time, and it was actually after her freshman year, Wichita State went to the Sweet 16, which was kind of who photoshopped them in the picture, And that was Katie's freshman year. And I remember we were actually playing Arkansas. Funny story, actually, I got our scouting film from Moritz before even knowing Moritz, because that was our matchup in the NCAA tournament, and we were actually down 0-2. And our head coach is like, we need a solution on the right side because we're just getting tooled. And I told him, it's like, what about Riley? And he stares at me. He's like, freshman, NCAA tournament right now, hasn't played much, really? I go, you want a different look? And I just remembered him going like, if it doesn't work out, it's your butt on the line. I'm like, oh boy. And the very first ball she got set, she hit it right in the antenna. And the head coach just gives me the evil eye. But then after that, she actually helps lead us to a victory. We come back, win in 5, and it was pretty cool for Katie Riley to, as a freshman, do that. Well, lo and behold, we finish in the Sweet 16, and I make my departure to South Carolina. And when Katie finished up her eligibility for indoor, it was, hey, you want to go play beach volleyball? Like, ride this out. So it was kind of cool for me personally to start with her career and then to be with her when she ends her collegiate career here at South Carolina. So that was pretty cool, like a full circle thing. But to tie in with Katie Riley, or Katie Zimmerman, was her partner, Macy Tendrich. 5'3" from Florida. All 4 years played with a graduate transfer that played indoor volleyball and didn't play beach volleyball. And she, for the longest time, she was the winningest player in program history. But people don't realize her partner was totally new and didn't really have any experience. And yet she still found a way to win, especially at 5'3". Was pretty cool to see.
Well, it sounds like they had pretty good coaching. But all right, so 10 years in the books, and now let's say we're looking ahead for the next 10 years for the program and for the sport. Where do you want to see the program grow? What's the next step or steps? And overall, for the sport itself, how can the sport get bigger? What do you want to see happen in that regard for both of you?
I think as the sport continues to grow, obviously the first 5 or 6 years we were adding, it seemed like 10 or 15 programs every year. And it's slowed down a little bit, and obviously we hit a speed bump in the middle, and then now we're starting to build momentum back up. But I think what you're continuing to see at the juniors level is that there's kids that are starving to continue to play this at the next level and in college. And so I think that as more colleges realize that and see, the pull that the sport has, that it's just going to continue to build. I think if you polled all the college coaches right now, even to say, because we just moved, last year was the first year we moved from 8 teams to 16 teams in the national championship. This year we're going to be 16 or 17 teams, and it's single elimination format, and it's this, amazing arena for those teams to compete. But I would say that we would all argue that the depth of talent, the depth of collegiate programs right now extends far past 16 teams even. And while we're probably hovering about 90 plus teams total that are able to compete for, the Division I championship, I think if we had 24 teams or even more competing for the championship, that would be a more fair representation of the quality and the athleticism in our sport right now. So I think as we're going to continue to try to push. I mean, I'm emailing other SEC indoor coaches and reaching out to administrators about how we can build this within the SEC alone. I think personally, I think our conference that we're in right now is unbelievable, probably the strongest in the country. We have 4 teams that are ranked in the top 7 right now. And I think if we continue to push as LSU and us, and hopefully eventually Texas, who just recently added too, if we can get a Georgia or a Mississippi State or a Florida on board and continue to build our brand as an SEC beach volleyball conference, that's just going to take this to a whole nother level. But I do think that it's going to be continued growth at all levels that's going to raise this ship collectively. Because I think the talent is there. The talent is coming up through the juniors. The ability of those players to continue to build it is huge. And then obviously from our perspective, we're always looking to compete. Every year we kind of compartmentalize it. It's not a comparison to last year or 5 years ago. It's what can we accomplish with this group that we have right now. But they're all hungry. They all want to make it. They all want to make it better. They see that. They get to see these kids come back from 10 years worth of alumni and hear the stories about what they went through and what they were able to accomplish, and they want to build on that. And I think that's kind of the fun part of being a part of that program, and for them to be telling stories to each other of how they pushed it and how they're going to continue pushing it is what's exciting.
Kind of looking at the whole macro of collegiate athletics. NIL and the transfer portal have definitely changed the landscape when it comes to college athletics. So unfortunately, I don't know if that's the best thing for beach volleyball and the growth of the sport. If you look at the numbers, the growth has almost stopped. No, there's still some programs being added, but not necessarily like the big schools that people have been hoping, like Moritz was talking about. So what does that mean? Well, I just think there's going to be a lot more parity within our sport. While there might not be more programs being added, the talent that's going to maybe traditionally lower level programs, well, they're getting better and better and better and better. So that just kind of really forces the top programs like, hey, this is not your throne like it used to be back in the day, because there are a lot more upsets. There are a lot more, how did they get in the tournament? How did they upset them? So it's really kind of excited me that now there's a lot more parity, where kind of when the sport first started, it was just all West Coast. It was just West Coast and Florida State.
Yep.
Essentially. But now it's like you have TCU, you have LSU, you have us upsetting some of those West Coast teams. So the growth of beach volleyball, I think the skill level and the talent is just going to go up. If the number of programs increases, I don't know. I don't think so, unfortunately, as of right now. But that's super exciting to see just the talent and seeing who's competing in these big games or these big programs. And it's like a girl from Kansas, or, it's not your typical coastal recruit that's becoming the top players in the country. Yep. Now you're finding them from wherever.